Hello and welcome to Event Perspectives. I'm your host, Rodney Hart, VP of Events at Rainfocus, and I'm thrilled to be bringing you this new content series where we're going to talk to some of the brightest minds in the event industry, the paths and journeys that led them to where they are today, and also what's the most interesting challenge that they're working on. I know that I'm already getting a lot out of the conversations that I'm having. I'm hoping that all of you will too. And for our first interview, was thrilled to have Rachel Cohen join, who is expert of all things event content at GitHub and also a fellow Northeastern Husky. So I'm going to go ahead and kick over to that conversation now. Rachel, welcome. Thrilled to have you.
Thank you for having me. Go Huskies.
Go Huskies. So before we get going, obviously, I want to get something to get us warmed up and talking. So have an icebreaker question if you're prepared for it. And that question is, if you could attend or participate in any event in history, what would it be and why?
I love this question. I think for me, as someone who focuses on event content and highlighting the speaker, TED comes to mind because that's really the core focus of TED is content and the speakers. So I think being at the first TED would be really cool. I know that was when one of the first demos of the Macintosh computer happened. I think there was a demo of the first CD-ROM or something like that there. So just to kind of date how far back TED goes, but I think it would be really cool to be at the precipice of something that was going to be so incredible and just seeing how they started that.
That's such an awesome answer. TED's one of those, and I have this sometimes, it's like industry envy, I think, when I see something just done so well. And really, it's like speaker presenter envy. So often I feel like I watch a presentation and it's incredibly powerful, to see something so well organized and put together. So that's a great answer. I was going to ask, so like CD-ROM, we're talking 90s? Was that?
It was 1984.
84. Okay, so that I guess I'm dating myself by not knowing the history there. But that makes sense. No, that's a great answer. Love it. And speaking of events and kind of the wild world that you and I both live in, would love to know just a little bit more about your background. How did you get involved in the event industry? What led you to events?
I love hearing this story from other event professionals because I feel like for the most part, we all just fell into it somehow. And I am no stranger to that. I went to Northeastern, as you mentioned, and my first job out of college was at an event tech software company. Internoc does not exist anymore, unfortunately, or exists in another name now. But I was just a marketing intern at first, and then upon graduation, they wanted to hire me full time, and the only role they had was an events job. And I had never done events before, but they really liked me. They knew I was organized. They knew I could handle it. And so I started off doing third-party events, sort of managing our trade show booth from event to event. And it also happened to be at the same time they were launching their own flagship event and needed someone to manage the speakers, which for me ended up working out really well because I studied communications in college, specifically public speaking, thinking, that would just be helpful for any career I had, not realizing that eventually it would be hyper-focused to the career I ended up having, ironically enough. So I started managing the speakers. I really loved that. I was at that company for about 5.5 years and grew to eventually be owning the overall content strategy and speaker management process for that conference. And then it got to a point where, I sort of outgrew the event and wanted to really focus on event content full time. And so ever since then, I've had a variety of roles leading event content, for the most part internally at companies for their conference or conferences. I have done some work at event agencies and in the event tech space, but primarily have been in internal for a company's event team managing content for their conference. And the more I do it, the more I love it. I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but it is very stressful, but I really appreciate how it flexes both my right brain and left brain, where I get to be creative, I get to think about storytelling, I get to think about, the attendee learning journey, but I also really need to hone my project management skills. You need to be very organized, logistics focused, and I think it bridges both of those gaps in a way that I really appreciate.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's like I think one of the things that I want to use, this I think this show is going to be a great avenue to tell some of these event stories. I think it's so interesting because similar. This isn't a show about me, but similar, right? Fell into it, which I think is just it's so funny how like I feel like events is like a magnet, and it pulls some, and I also think whether they do or don't get repel, I think it also has that repel effect on probably some personalities, which it's so interesting. So I think that's really interesting, really well said. And I'll get into a little bit more about kind of your current roles and some of the challenges that you're solving there. But just curious, like, was there a moment? So you totally agree with that left-right brain. I think it's what I love about events. But was there a moment as you were kind of working in events for the first time? You had kind of done a role, mentioned a co-op. Love Northeastern co-ops. That you said, okay, this is an industry. Like this is where I'm meant to be. Or was there a moment that you felt like, oh, this is it for me?
Yeah, I think it was that moment where I was going to leave Enternock, and I decided to kind of jump in and really pursue this as a career. I didn't know if event content was a career at the time. This was about 2016, I believe. And I just started poking around LinkedIn and finding people who had the kinds of jobs that I would want one day. And the more research I did on those people, the more I talked to them, the more I learned about their journeys. It sounded very similar to their personalities in a way, felt very similar to me. I felt like a kindred spirit with them.
Yeah.
And I think by doing that research and by talking to those people and then eventually getting a job in event content and continuing to get jobs in event content, it's made me more and more aware of the fact that this is the right career path for me. And I think in particular, I'm talking about event content, I mean events in general, but also event content. I love to meet people. I love to connect people. I love to learn about people. And that's all I do all day is I talk to people. I learn about people. I figure out what their stories are and help them figure out how to tell them on the stage that I'm producing. Yeah. So if you are that kind of person, I think having those moments where you realize how your job connects so well to your personality, really, that's what clicked for me.
Yeah. And that's so cool. And like you said, when you get to see it, I think maybe that was, some of it too, right? In events is you're full circle, for better or worse. I know people who work in roles and it's kind of like, hey, you're doing one aspect of it. And obviously that's an important aspect. And, every role has its own piece. I feel like with events, I think it can be so stressful because, it's like the problems you either do or don't solve today are your problems that you did or didn't solve yesterday, and so like, it comes full circle, but then that moment too, where you get the payoff of seeing that happen, in person, I think is great. So, I know you're at GitHub now. You're still working in event content. What was the journey that led to that? I think that's always a big open question. You kind of mentioned, poking around LinkedIn and looking for people who had roles that you liked, in general in your past, like. From an event perspective, I think the journeys are always so interesting. Just curious, like, how did you wind up in the role that you're in?
So before I was at GitHub, I was in your shoes. I was at an event tech company, and I got to produce events for event professionals, which was really fun, very meta, as I'm sure you know. A really empathetic audience, but also an audience with very high expectations. And through that role, I just came into contact with so many event folks. And then I realized I wanted to get back into kind of the event planning role at a company that puts on an annual flagship conference. And it just sort of was kismet. This role at GitHub opened up around the same time that I was looking, and I got connected through my network to Nina, who is the director of events at GitHub, who's now my boss, and it all worked out. I think honestly, most of the roles I've gotten have been through that method of getting connected through your network. That's why I'm always, I always love to do things like this. I always love to meet other event professionals, go to events for event professionals, because I think this industry, it feels like one big family. Everyone sort of knows everyone somehow. And that was eventually how it all happened. I also think the experience that I've done this now for about 15 years. So, and this was a role that hadn't really existed before. So I think they wanted someone to come in who could create a real structure for an event as it relates to its content program.
Yeah, so interesting. A quick question. You're like in your role now, what are the problems that you're solving on a given day? At the top, I kind of mentioned getting into that most interesting challenge that you're solving. And I think maybe a little bit before that, what are the problems you're solving on a given day?
Well, ultimately, it depends on sort of where we are in the event planning process. But I would say a consistent theme is I talk about bridging gaps. I work very closely with internal subject matter experts. So folks on our product marketing team, folks on our customer marketing team, our developer relations team, those who understand the messages that we want to convey at our events, the stories we want to tell, while also spending a lot of time with event operations folks, thinking about our speaker portal, thinking about the room sets and the AV production plan. And those two groups of people don't necessarily need to talk to each other. So I'm constantly translating from one group to the other, kind of what they need, while also making sure I'm infusing my own perspective. I like to say that in every conversation, I'm the voice of the attendee and the speaker. So when I'm talking to, folks on the marketing team or on the product team who want to just do feature sessions that feature our demos let me flip that around. Demo our features all day, but not thinking about the value proposition for attendees, or they want to do a session that's 2 hours and it's like, well, hey, let's think about that. Or from a production perspective, if they want to do, really sort of concrete times that we start and end here, we break here, like, okay, that we can make that work, but let's make sure we're giving enough time for the content itself. So I'm always sort of context switching for those different groups of people, which I really can be a lot sometimes, but that seems to be a consistent theme for every day, depending on where we are in the planning process.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting how, so often it's like you need to be the advocate of then also the other side of the, because I think we can always get trapped in our own, like, hey, this is the most interesting thing. And it's like, but is it, or 2 hours is the right format. It's like, when was the last time you last listened to something for 2 hours and really, fully enjoyed it? But I think that, that translating is particularly interesting. It probably transitions well into the next question and really the heart of the episode, which is, so today, what's the most interesting challenge that you're working on?
So I think, kind of connected to what I was just saying, I think I do a lot of educating in my role of just the things I care about, but also what my job actually is. I think a lot of people still aren't really familiar with event content as a career, as a role on an events team. And so that context switching that I do, part of that is also educating, is keeping people aware of the things they should be thinking about from each other's perspectives. And what I really love about working at GitHub is that there's a true belief in that role, so much so that I now have a team. I've got 2 people who are on my team who are focused on content strategy and what we call content operations as well. And we're taking on more events in our portfolio. Primarily, I was originally just responsible for Universe, which is GitHub's annual flagship event, but now my team is also responsible for our internal revenue kickoff, our KO, or sales kickoff, people might know it as. So I think it's the interesting problem is scaling that event content function to other events in our portfolio. My team is working on something that I jokingly call our manifesto. That's going to detail sort of all the processes and materials that we use when approaching event content and speaker management. And so, we live and breathe this. We've been doing it for a long time. So it's a matter of taking that methodology and translating it in a way that anyone can just pick up and run with. Because clearly we can't be everywhere at once. And there are a lot of events that happen at GitHub. So scaling that level of professionalism when it comes to speaker management and content strategy is something that I'm working on.
We do try and be everywhere at once. So it's unfortunately we haven't mastered that part yet. But that's awesome. Obviously you're doing, what you're doing is going well, right? Because you're getting tasked to do more. In terms of what you think, like, are there particular aspects that you feel like as a content team you're doing particularly well right now?
I think creating structure. Honestly, helping people understand you can't do X before Y. So, we can't, and this seems pretty basic to you and me, but we need to really have a plan. We need to know how many sessions we're going to have. We need to know how many speakers theoretically we're planning for. We need to think about, the overall attendee flow and how we want them to approach our event before we even launch a CFS, before we launch a call for sessions. I think there's a lot of like cart before the horse. It's like, okay, let's throw an agenda together. Like, let's throw some sessions out, on a grid and call it a day. But how many sessions are you going to have? What's the breakdown of those sessions? How many sessions are for more beginner attendees versus more advanced attendees? If you have XYZ topic you want to cover, what percentage of content should cover each of those topics? Just creating that plan and creating that structure and that timeline before you even start is something that we've really honed in on, and we're doing really well in the events that we work on. So I think just defining for people what an event content program means and what the different stages are, and also something that I've really taken to heart and I've really coached my team on is, this is nobody's full-time job. It's only our full-time job, but everyone else is sort of an add-on to everything they're doing. So how can we make that as easy as possible? How can we create a timeline that takes into account all the different things going on at our company, all the other responsibilities? How do we create tools and processes that are really easy and clear to follow? How do we try to answer the questions before before we're asked them? Just thinking of every possible direction that things could come at us, and how are we prepared for that?
When you think about those challenges and scaling, is like which path do you feel like is the one that might be the biggest challenge? Is it working with other stakeholders and kind of getting them to understand the plan and where you're going with it? Is it just a matter of setting up the tools and helping that scale out your operations? Is it working within the team and kind of keeping the team focused on what those maybe key metrics or key value props are that you want to really instill at each event that you're working on? I'm curious, like, what do you anticipate being the biggest challenge in scaling that expertise?
That's a great question. It's all of those things, definitely. But I think if I was going to say one thing specifically that comes to mind is that you can't please everyone. So, and being okay with that. Our role involves a lot of having to say no to a variety of people, whether it's to people, within the company who want certain customers to speak, or if it's speakers who want to do certain things on stage, or, event operations folks who, want to cap you at a certain number of speakers on stage, things like that. Sometimes you have to say no, and you have to advocate for, again, the attendee and the speaker in every conversation. So, when I get asked for, hey, can we do a bunch of, and I know other folks who do that content, hopefully will agree with me on this, but if I get asked to do a bunch of panels on stage, while great, need to have a lot of prep for them to be really good. And most just don't have that. And that's fine. But at the end of the day, then you have to make the call to not put a bunch of panels on stage. And that might frustrate some people. But
Right.
then you have your reason. Like attendees, unless you're willing to really go the extra mile to prep this panel so that it's something that attendees, would need to be in person to see, or versus just listening to it as a podcast, we can't do it. Attendee data has shown me that they don't really want panels. They want more hands-on interactive content. So I think it's being able to say no, honestly, in a way that both speaks to why and is rational and understanding, while making space for the things you can accommodate. And, just being able to set those boundaries, but at the end of the day, creating a great event, which is the goal that everyone has.
Yeah. I feel like another, boy, I don't even know if we'd call it a mantra in events, but never doing the same event twice. You're talking about kind of scaling expertise, and obviously here at Rain Focus we think about the tools and how do we help everyone scale and do that next event easier. And then I feel like as events people, we always have in the back of our mind, well, we can't do the same thing twice. I'm curious to what extent, and you've kind of mentioned some of the things that you're looking at from attendee data and the fact that, hey, we're in person. And, I think it's something that I'm looking at too. We're in person. Let's use that time effectively. I'm curious to what level content has some of those same kind of consistent event pressures of not doing the same thing twice.
Oh, it's every day I'm dealing with that situation. I think it's important to kind of retain some similarities year over year, just from an attendee comfort perspective. They want to know when they get there what to expect. So there are certain kinds of sessions we're always going to do. We're always going to have, speakers up on a stage talking to slides, telling their stories, but something that we've added, something new that I added last year, and then something new I'm adding this year is last year we didn't really have content that allowed attendees to connect with each other. So we've had plenty of networking events and we have opportunities for socializing, but we didn't have it in a content format. And so I introduced a stage called our Discussions Lounge. And so we have sessions that are facilitated by speakers rather than presented. And it had attendees in small groups talking to each other, and they were really popular. And so it showed us, okay, attendees are looking for more opportunities to connect. What else can we, so we're keeping that. We're going to keep that from last year, this year. But then another thing that came, that rang true for me at the event last year was our demo stage was hopping. People loved to watch tools be demoed and to see how the technology actually worked. Which was great. And I loved that. And I'm like, okay, how can we build upon this? So this year we're adding, well, first of all, we doubled the number of demos. Now we're going to have 2 demo stages. And second of all, we've added a session type called the sandbox stage. So basically they're sessions where a speaker will give sort of a short demo of a tool, and then the rest of the time attendees will have an opportunity to play with the tool on their own in a sandbox environment. And I think that session type in particular is a perfect example of retaining some of the old with infusing some of the new. We had sessions that did all of that. We have workshops where it's more hands-on. We have demos where people are demoing tools, but how can we bring them together? So I think when you're approaching adding something entirely new to an event, think about what's worked in the past and how you can build upon it, and also how you can make it easy for people to understand what it is and how it's going to benefit them.
Yeah, I love that answer. I think that's such a good mix, because then that's the, that creature comfort of having some sense, right? I remember that there was kind of a trend, or maybe it's still out there, of unstructured event, or there was oh, we're going to flip it upside down. And it's okay, and maybe this is, being in the industry for long enough now that I'm like, wait. Okay, there's still a lot that we're doing well. We don't need to change the whole thing, but I think that makes a lot of sense. But when you say add, and, just knowing the parameters of an event, that necessitates something probably needs to go away. Is that a difficult conversation as you and team kind of think about the event content, the plan? We're going to add this, and sure, it could be a bigger space. It could be more. So there is definitely more at events. But I'm curious, when you're looking at adding, is there a difficult or kind of a realistic conversation that you're approaching around, hey, this is something that's, gonna be, put to the side in favor of kind of this new thing that we're seeing trend well with our audience?
Yeah, and to answer those questions, I always go back to the data. So a data point that I really like to lean on is, especially if I'm getting asked like, oh, can we add a bunch more sessions? Is I look at the average attendee per session, number of attendees per session. And I did an analysis a long time ago that showed that this was at the time, it's probably changed now because of the pandemic and, so on and so forth. But at the time, I looked at a bunch of different tech events and I looked at how many sessions they had versus how many attendees they had and just did sort of a back of the napkin calculation.
Yeah.
And it looked like there were about, on average, anywhere from 50 to 70 attendees per session. Okay, that's a good sort of benchmark to have for a session to feel full. I mean, depending on your event size and depending on your room size, but that's a good, if it was, more than that, it meant you didn't have enough content, or if it was less than that, it meant you had too much. And so I remember I was working on an event once where that number was 12. Like I did that math for us and our number was 12, which meant we had way too much content. And so whenever I cut, a bunch of content. And then when I got pushback for it, it's like, hey, with that data point, I'm learning that our speakers are speaking to empty rooms, which not a great experience for a speaker, not a great experience for an attendee. So if there are these things you want to talk about, is there another way we can talk about them? Can we do a blog post? Can we do a webinar? Can we do a podcast? Can we take, can we do a session that kind of blends a couple topics together and take a bite of that and turn it into something else? So I think it's always being prepared to have your reason. I kind of said this earlier, but to have your reason that makes sense to people. And also understand what their motivations are. Don't just say no. Understand, ask questions, try to understand what they need to get from whatever they're asking for and see if there's some other way that we can make it happen.
Oh, such great advice, Rachel. I love that you went to the data side of things because, before I was in this role, I was very much more, behind the scenes, tools, tech, making things happen. And so often, it's funny when you present data to an anecdotal situation, like how we think we remember something versus like, well, it was, oh no, that was definitely a popular session. It's like, on what measure? Here's data of survey. Here's also data of attendance compared to, and that's not always super, people aren't always super receptive to that information. But I think it's such an important step, as well as what you said, right? Because it's left in right brain, because it's not just like, oh, numbers, facts, this is it. And it's like there can be extenuating circumstances or time, place, all of that. But love that you went there. I feel like I could keep going on this for a while, but instead I'm going to wrap this portion up with this question. If we're talking 1 year from now, and I'm going to assume that you're going to crush it, you and the team are going to crush it. You scaled this effectively to sales kickoff and maybe some other events. And I don't know if you want me to say, I don't know how many more you want to be doing it. What do you think you nailed? Like what were the aspects that caused that to go well?
I would love to hear more from the speakers that we've managed, and continue to hear really glowing recommendations or glowing reactions to their experience speaking at our events. We want, at any GitHub event, internally or externally, we want it to be one of the best experiences that a speaker has. We work with speakers who are speaking constantly, and I want us to be known in the industry as an event that you feel very taken care of, very supported, that you know what's expected of you, and and you feel like you're given the tools you need to succeed. I want GitHub to be known as the company that does that for their speakers.
That's awesome. I love that. Do you plan to measure that? Is that something that you're planning to kind of roll out, or are you already measuring it?
Yes. So we rolled out a speaker survey for the first time last year. We did pretty well. So Of course, I don't remember the score off the top of my head, but I don't remember it being particularly bad.
Yeah.
I don't remember it being
Yeah.
out of 5 though. I don't remember it being 5.
Yeah.
So we've
Yeah,
always
yeah.
we've got places to go.
That's the goal, right?
Yeah.
The dream is still there.
Exactly. But I want to do more of that. I want to keep doing that for all of our events. I want to understand what worked, what didn't, how we can continue to fine tune that experience for speakers so that the result is kind of what I just explained.
Excellent. That was awesome. Before I let you go, I'm going to transition in what I hope is going to be a fun section. We're going to call it the lightning round. Going to just fire off some questions. They might be event related. They might not be. So just answer that comes off the top of your head. And then for me, the difficult part is I'm not going to react.
Okay.
That's what I said. All right. Are we ready?
Yes.
All right. Here we go. What is one book that everyone should read?
I'm going to cheat because it's in my background. The Art of Gathering. It's that rainbow book. It's by Priya Parker. She's incredible. I think every event professional, but every person should read it. It just talks about how to bring people together in a way that's genuine and lasting.
Awesome. You have a concert to close your event. Who is your dream musical artist?
This is very specific to me and potentially other people who are in Boston, but I don't know if you know the band Guster.
Yep.
Yeah. So I love Guster. They're my favorite band. Selfishly, that would be my answer. I don't know if everyone loved that, but I think they have general appeal.
Awesome. Hey, listen, you got a chance. Be selfish with it. If you could host an event anywhere in the world, where would it be?
I just came upon this hotel because I'm going to Switzerland with some friends in a few weeks, and there's this hotel that overlooks Lake Lucerne in Switzerland called, I think it's like the Bergenstock Hotel. It's like built into a mountain. It has this incredible view. It's huge, so it'd be great for an event. And I just think, I think the only thing from a content perspective is people would be too busy, staring at the window to pay attention to the speakers. But that would be a dream location for sure.
It'd be like a one session event. The rest is just like enjoy yourself and extend, as the content professional, extend, on that one. What's your go-to comfort food during the event planning stress?
Like really sour gummy candy.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Which one?
Probably Sour Patch Watermelon.
Yeah, I love it. What is your current favorite mobile app?
I'm a big crossword puzzle nerd, so I love the New York Times Games app. Although the more games they add to that app, the more time I spend on it, which is probably what they're going for. But yeah, every morning I have to do all of them, except for spelling bee. I'm not really a spelling bee person, but Wordle, Connections, the crossword, Letterboxd, all of them.
Love it. Every once in a while, I look at my screen time too, and I'm like, oh boy, things have gotten out of hand. And finally, a self-serving question for me. What is your favorite Rain Focus feature?
Live tables, definitely. I've spoken at Rain Focus Insight twice, and both times the sessions were either about live tables or heavily featured live tables. So I'm a live table super fan for sure.
I'm right with you. Just nothing better. Get all the data in as a report, but let me do stuff with it in one place. Yeah. Live tables. Awesome. Okay. Thank you very much. This was great to have you. I'm not going to let you go quite yet. I think we've hit on how the event industry isn't really for the faint of heart. It's a stressful. It's on that list of most stressful jobs, and oftentimes we're also explaining to people what it is that we do, because I think people have a hard time placing us sometimes. But in kind of your career and the path that you've carved out, I'd love to know, what's your favorite piece of advice or nugget of wisdom that you'd have for, your fellow event professionals or aspiring event professionals who are hearing this? What would you say to them?
While it can be stressful, I often remind myself that we're not ER doctors or other emergency personnel. If a session starts 5 minutes late or a speaker pulls out last minute, it will be frustrating, but the event will still be a success. And things that seem like they matter in that moment really don't. They won't in a year. I think you shouldn't let your work define you. And this is kind of morbid, but I do say this to people, is when I die, I don't want my headstone to say that I was a great event planner. Like, I don't want that to be what I'm known for at all. I want to be known for the impact that I had on the people that I care about. And so that's how I live my life. I live my life around that goal. And I think there are moments where work is stressful and it can take over your life a little bit, but it shouldn't be all the time. And you should still set boundaries so that you're still making time to do the things you love and to be with the people you care about.
Rachel, I love that answer, and I'm sure your team loves that answer, because it probably means that you're contributing to an environment that people like to be in and around, and I think that's so well said, right? If you're going to be dealing with something that's stressful, being able to step back and also be contribute to an environment that doesn't treat all of those moments as like an ER doctor, because it's not.
Exactly.
Right? But
it's not that big of a deal.
yeah. Rachel, thank you so much. It's been fantastic. I know, we started this conversation because I was just, as I like to do, pulling you in and getting your feedback on something where really I'm just, taking your advice and then also twisting your arm to be part of the episode. But I loved it so much. I hope everyone else did as well. If you're watching this and curious, I would say stay tuned for more episodes where we'll continue to explore, others that are in the event industry. If you're interested in participating, there is a link in the description below. Would love to have you join as well. And until next time, I'm Rodney Hart, and this has been Event Perspectives.
This was awesome, Rodney. Thank you for putting this together. Thank you for having me. And I look forward to hearing more episodes.